Oh, Stalin was a mighty man, and a mighty man was he. He led the Soviet people on the road to victory. All through the revolution, he fought at Lenin's side, and they made a combination till the day that Lenin died. He said, come on, you people, we must work with brain and hand. And then one day the Nazis came into the Soviet land. They plundered to the Volga, to Stalingrad. And then Joe Stalin said, come on, me boys, and kicked them out again. Oh, Stalin was a southerner, in Georgia he was born, where the oranges grow thick and fast and fields of waving corn. And Stalin is a farmer, his fingers they are green, and he has planted the biggest crop the world has ever seen. One day he looked upon the map and frowned and shook his head. There's too much brown and not enough green, these were the words he said. We'll have to change the weather, boys, he said, and then he smiled. So let's begin by planting trees along 3,000 miles. So Stalin rolled his sleeves up then and said it's time to start. The Volga River and the Don, they are too far apart. I think we'd better join them, so come and help me, pal, and we'll build a mighty waterway, the Volga-Don Canal. Then Stalin went into the north, and there saw rivers three, all emptying their waters into the polar sea. Now that's not right, Joe Stalin said, these rivers, they are ours. We'll turn them round and make them work and make electric power. There was a range of mountains that were standing in the way, so Stalin put his hand out and smoothed them all away. For Joe, he is determined to make the land all green, and that's the biggest project that the world has ever seen. Oh, Stalin is a mighty man, and he has a mighty plan. He's harnessed nature to the plow to work for the good of man. He's hammered out the future, the fortune he has seen, and he's made the worker state the best the world has ever seen.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome. It is the inaugural show of 2025. We have been away for a few days, to please pardon the absence, but decided to take a short break during the New Year's Christmas interval. And here we are again, returning for the first proper show of the year. Now, you must forgive me for the title of this particular program. This is a nod and a wink, in fact, slightly more than that, to the interventions of a certain Mr. Elon Musk, son of Errol, who has been spending his time on his own platform, first of all, calling for censorship of anybody who criticizes him, just like the last guys did. But also, he has been berating our dearly departed, beloved Prime Minister, a certain Sir Keith Starmer, and accusing him of some truly dreadful things, some of which, of course, he may well be guilty of. Now, if you're not familiar with the Musk interventions, this started a few days ago, and it started after Musk had, I think it's fair to say, have been exposed in terms of his affiliations and his interests, his class interests, over the H-1B visa debate in the United States. Now, Musk, defending his co-leader of the Doge, certain Mr. Ramaswamy, waded into this row that was going on over H-1B visas, which is an American visa scheme allowing certain categories of worker, quite large numbers of workers, to come into and work in the United States. It's defended by the likes of Musk and Ramaswamy on the basis it's used to bring in specialists. However, a cursory examination of the record show that it's used to bring in a lot more labor than that, and for a lot broader, on a much broader basis than just tech specialists. But the fact that Musk and some tech con man sleazebag like Ramaswamy would be all in favor of this, of course, should not be a surprise. Musk is above everything else committed to his class interests, and so for the purposes of serving those, he'll go with the Democrats sometimes. He'll call himself a socialist sometimes. He'll play the card of nativism sometimes, and maybe he'll do all three inside a day sometimes. Just depends upon what he sees as being best for his personal interests, for his class interests. And that explains Musk's approval of, and one might say intense defense of the H-1B visas against the likes of Bannon and others who were attacking Trump and of course Musk, but attacking Trump specifically for wobbling on the issue. Because Trump, of course, has flip-flopped on the issue, just as he has done with everything else, going back and forth on it. Now he says, I'm in favor of them. We're going to need to bring in a lot of people because we're going to create so many jobs, which, of course, is the platform of the sort of libertarian tech scumbags. Trump has now adopted it. So Trump's nativism, if he ever believed in it, Trump's staunch anti-immigration policies, if you ever believed that he had policies that were too much different to Joe Biden and Barack Obama, and Trump's call for the protection of American jobs, so-called, by clamping down on immigration, all of this has proven to be a complete farce. Biden has, of course, been responsible for the deportation of more people than Trump was. Just as Trump didn't, I think, manage to match Obama's record on the issue. So with Trump, it's all noise, it's all sound, it's all memes and right-wing virtue signaling. When it comes down to it, essentially, Trump just serves the interests of a specific section of the capitalist class, which, like most of the rest of the American capitalist class, profits from immigration and always has done. And so Musk, of course, is not going to be in favor of actually clamping down on it. He'll just make a lot of noise and he'll retweet a few things and virtue signal in a right-wing fashion to make it look as if he is. When it came down to it, Musk revealed his hand very quickly. Now, how does this relate to his berating of Keir Starmer and Nigel Farage? We'll come back to that later. Now, Musk realized when all the MAGA people were laying into him that he'd been exposed, that he had essentially revealed what he's really in this for, why he's sticking like a limpet to Trump. He's after defending his business interests. Remember, this is a man who makes an awful lot of money out of Pentagon contracting. So he sells a lot of services to the US government, including, of course, selling Starlink, the satellite system. And, of course, he's got a lot of contracts with co-developing stuff with NASA. So a lot of his business hinges upon the goodwill of those who are ultimately responsible for management in the federal government. So that he would want to be as close to the man who is nominally, at least, the chief executive of that government makes complete sense. And doing sort of MAGA cosplay stuff, again, makes complete sense from Musk's particularly cynical, self-interested perspective. But in realizing that he'd suffered a loss by going apeshit on Twitter and defending the H-1B visa and getting chewed up by Bannon and others in the MAGA sphere and being revealed for what he is, which is a slippery opportunist, he clearly felt that he needed to do something to throw the MAGA base off his scent. So what do? Well, you can't really say anything about American politics because that's just going to come back to your the issues that you've just exposed yourself over. So what's the standby option for American politicians who want to virtue signal about something but don't want to actually have to do anything serious about it? Well, you start berating Europe, or in Musk's case, you start retweeting a load of stuff from a certain Mr. Stephen Yaxley Lennon, known by his stage name, Tommy Robinson. And you really amp up the anti-Muslim, anti-Arab rhetoric. You start tweeting stuff out just as various people in the Trump sphere did 9 years ago now, in Trump's first presidential run, about Britain having no-go zones in it, that there's no-go zones for whites, that jihadists have seized power in so many areas, that the government is being turned into a caliphate, that sort of thing. So Musk's just picked up on some of that, but he's gone more, he's leaning more into the Yaxley Lennon stuff of the moment, which is Yaxley Lennon's manipulation and exploitation of what are genuine scandals involving it's referred to as grooming teenage girls, very underage girls, for sexual exploitation by gangs of men. Of course, this unfortunately goes on quite a lot in Britain, as it does in all of the imperialist countries and further beyond that. But some of these high-profile stories over the last decade related to gangs of guys who were doing these crimes, who were of Pakistani, Bangladeshi origin, many of whom were Muslim. And this hit the headlines for a variety of reasons. Again, these scandals started to come out 10 years ago, involving places like Rochdale, etc., all the places that Musk has mentioned in this country. And of course, Musk got a lot of hits on that, got a lot of his credibility back amongst the so-called nationalist crowd. And he achieved what he wanted to through doing that, by bigging up Yaxley Lennon, by exploiting the genuine scandals over stuff like the Rochdale scandals. And this helped him restore his Twitter equilibrium, shall we say. But let's not just focus on what Musk blurted out, because he'll just be retweeting stuff or tweeting about shit that other people have fed to him. Besides, I really don't think that anybody should take seriously Elon Musk anti-pedo campaigner, given his well-documented association with a certain Jeffrey Epstein. So whereas, of course, we should not take the likes of Elon Musk remotely seriously when he feigns concern over the fate of those children who were abused in places like Rochdale, Oldham, Telford, Rotherham, and many, many more places in Britain, the likes of Musk should be dismissed out of hand because, of course, he is associated with some of the worst sexual predators in the Western world. However, he is able to manipulate this situation because there is a correct sense amongst many in this country that those who do abuse children, sometimes on a vast scale, do get away with it, or that many of them get away with it. Now, this has, of course, been filtered through racialization and the anti-Muslim paradigm of politics in the bourgeois sense, which has been operating for over 25 years now. And whilst it is true that some of these gangs of perverts are made up predominantly of Muslim men, it is by no means exclusively them who indulge in these repulsive activities. It is across the board. There are many examples of gangs of white guys, black guys, all kinds of demographics are represented in this particularly horrible rogues gallery. And the simple reason is that it is going to be those who are preponderant in a particular area who are going to be the most guilty. See, when I was growing up, and this goes to show that this is not a new scandal, because I grew up in the 90s, everybody knew that there were certain children's homes in the area I grew up in where the perverted men largely from just out of town, because it seems that back then they liked to go to the next town over, would go and pick up the troubled teenage girls who lived there for the purposes of raping them. No other way to describe it other than that, because that is what it was. You could try and be a little fancy about it and call it statutory rape, but you have some pervy 45-year-old guy trying to pick up some teenage girl for the purposes of what he would describe as sex, but there's no other way to really describe it other than carrying out a rape. And this was well known, that there were certain children's homes, mostly housing teenage girls that men from out of town would come to, and would abuse them somewhere close by. And again, common knowledge in the town I grew up in, and no one, to my knowledge of it, did much about it. Cops knew about it, didn't really do much about it. And this is a pattern that repeats itself. And here we get to the elements of truth that we must deal with. Firstly, is that the authorities do not take crimes of any nature, but particularly of a sexual nature, committed against teenage girls in particular, but teenage boys too, children in general, really. They do not take these crimes very seriously. The police don't, the local authorities don't, the national authorities don't. Until it becomes a massive scandal, then they pretend to do something about it. And herein we must examine the reasons why. Let's start with the fundamental reasons. The state, as it is currently constituted, is not there to protect these girls, or it's not there to protect the working class as a whole, and it's certainly not there to protect or even do justice on the behalf of those who are at the lowest end of the working class, bordering on lumpenized. That is not who the agencies of the British capitalist state are there to defend. Never have been, never will be. As I said, these scandals are not new. The word grooming is new. The way it is presented is new. But these scandals are they're as old as urbanization. They're as old as the modern layout of England and Scotland and Wales. They're as old as power imbalances between certain more powerful men and those who are, of course, the most vulnerable and the least protected in any society. And I have known over the course of the last few years, I've come to know various people who were subjected to what would be called now grooming gangs, and these were both men and women who passed through supposedly secure accommodation for children in the 50s and the 60s. And these men, as they are now, as it was mostly men that I met who'd survived this, were people in their later 50s, 60s, or even into their 70s by the time I spoke to them, who had been subjected to this same thing. And the authorities hadn't given a shit back in the 50s and the 60s. They didn't even pretend to give a shit. The scandals of the 80s and the 90s forced them to at least pretend to, but of course they won't do anything about it. And that is a fundamental reality of the capitalist state. We are told that it is there to secure law and order, that the state forces are there to be on your side, but this is just simply not the case. And what is the case, though, is that they are there to not protect the working class. They are there to keep order. Now, what does that mean? That means they are there to secure the current set of property relations. And sometimes that involves repressing the working class. Quite a lot of the time it involves doing that. Sometimes, though, it involves making sure that certain scandals don't get out of hand. So if there's a particularly gruesome serial killer, for instance, that probably needs to be resolved because it's going to cause problems. It's going to cause social problems, disturbances. If there's a particularly brutal rapist, for instance, there will be pressure on the authorities to solve that particular question. So the police will be instructed to find somebody who's guilty. Whether they're actually guilty or not is usually quite a separate matter. But this is what I mean. The job of the coppers in this system is not to do justice. It is not to protect you or me or 90-odd% of the population. It is to keep order, i.e. keep the current order as it is. And that does not mean protecting or taking seriously the complaints of the poorest and the most vulnerable sections of our society. Their voices are not listened to now. They weren't listened to 70 years ago. And as long as this system continues, all they will get is lip service from those in charge. Because again, the system is not there to protect them. It is, however, there to protect certain other people. First of all, the capitalist class themselves. Secondly, the caste, shall we say, of state officials, propagandists, media figures, academics, those who man the levers of power in Britain or the United States or any imperialist country. The system is there to protect them, and they are there to protect the system. So, in a system which is so wholly closed off from scrutiny, so completely immune to democratic pressure because of its heavily bureaucratized nature, it is a breeding ground for abusers of all kinds. And of course, they often get away with it because the instinct of all of these institutions, whenever they are subjected to criticism, is to cover up. And those who do the most effective cover-ups, those are the men that get promoted. So when Elon Musk goes after Keir Starmer and says Starmer didn't prosecute sex offenders enough, there's elements of truth in that. Because Keir Starmer's job, when he was head prosecutor, head of the what is known in Britain as the Crown Prosecution Service, was not actually to prosecute criminals, not really. He's a bureaucratic game player who got to the top by carrying out the dirty work, being a bagman for the ruling class. That's his job. And so when Musk and others on the right say Starmer covered up all these scandals, people will see there being an element of truth in that, because there is. Everybody now knows, thanks to Boris Johnson blurting it out, that Keir Starmer essentially covered up for Jimmy fucking Savile. More than that, Keir Starmer covered up for a guy called Greville Janner, later Lord Janner, longtime Labour MP and notorious paedophile. Everybody knew that. Janner came from Leicester. He was MP in Leicester for a long time. And I know that he was investigated on multiple occasions and was let go because he was well connected. Keir Starmer was implicated in the decision close to the end of Janner's life not to prosecute him. Now, why is that? Did he feel pity for a dying and confused old man, or was he doing a favor to his friends in the political establishment? Now, when it comes to the question of the grooming gangs, the explanation given by the likes of, well, Musk hasn't come up with this, he retweets it. The explanation given by the likes of the actor known as Stephen Yaxley Lennon, stage name Tommy Robinson, the explanation they give is that the police have gone woke, that they're too into diversity, they're too afraid of upsetting the Muslims to seriously go after these abusers. Now, this is a serious claim, and therefore we should examine it. If we examine the history of the last 20 years, do we really think, is it a serious case that somebody wants to make, that the police in this country are particularly woke? Now, don't come at me, start gibbering on about pride flags and shit like that. When it comes to the Muslim community, who have been subjected to, or I should say certain parts of the Muslim community, who have been subjected to mass surveillance, many of whom have been subjected to house arrest, arbitrary detentions, state harassment, which is very well documented, and of course systematic state frame-ups and all kinds of other manipulations by the intelligence services. All the way through this whole so-called war on terror period, this has been happening. Does this state, do these police forces in Britain, do these intelligence services strike you as having gone woke, of being afraid to arrest people in Muslim communities? How is this a serious claim? It's cited by the likes of Yaxley Lennon because there was some justification given by some senior cop as to why they wouldn't arrest some of these perverts who were up to these criminal acts. Now, some senior cop may well have said that, but that's not why they weren't arrested. That's just the excuse that some scumbag senior officer throws out there, because they're always looking for excuses not to go after these collections of foul and disgusting individuals. Now, the real reason is, well, it goes back to what I was saying before. They just don't give a shit about it. Investigating these things would take time and resources and effort, and it would take a big team of detectives, or a reasonable sized team at least, and a lot of police resources to go after 10 to 20 guys. Most senior officers given the nature of the crimes, also given the class position of those who they are most frequently committed against, most of the senior officers don't give a shit. Or, much like Keir Starmer, they are in the position that they are in because they aren't dedicated servants pursuing justice, dedicated servants of justice, I should say. They are there because they are the most effective men at covering something up, sweeping something under the rug. Now, this merits further research and discussion, but I'll commit to doing that. But as my response to the claim that the police have gone woke, that's why they're not investigating them, is, well, look at why the police didn't investigate some of the high-profile pedos. Look at why they didn't investigate Jana or Savile or Cyril Smith, the MP for Rochdale, who was being complained about by teenage boys all the way back in the early 1970s. So why didn't they go after them? Well, they didn't go after them because they were connected. They were very well connected in the case of people like Jana and Cyril Smith. Who were they connected to? Other sex offenders, other very powerful men who were abusing boys and girls for many, many decades. And you don't pull at that string, because if you do, then all kinds of repulsive facts might air themselves. Or if you arrested even a backbench Liberal MP like Cyril Smith, whose predilections were well known across Westminster. In fact, Sir David Steele, the former Liberal Party leader, who asked Smith directly whether he'd done these things of which he was accused, Smith confirmed to him that he had. Steele recommended him for a knighthood. And if you know about the, shall we say, the way in which the British bourgeois are raised and the kind of things they get up to at their private schools, well, you wouldn't be surprised that someone like Cyril Smith will get a knighthood, because those people are a dime a dozen, to use an Americanism, coming out of that fucking private school system. Now, the elements of truth that we've been covering so far in the claims made by these ultra-reactionary figures are that, first of all, Starmer has spent most of his time covering things up and not prosecuting some very serious criminals. Now, that is true, as we've established. 2, that the police don't give a shit. That's always been true. 3, that the entire so-called care sector, particularly with regard to children in this country, is a joke and always has been, and has always been riddled with the lowest and most degenerate forms of human life, who exploit it in order to get to vulnerable children. That's true. The fact that none of the politicians have an interest in doing anything about it, and that many of them will be connected somehow. If they're not direct participants themselves, they will be connected either through party or family loyalty or establishment loyalty to people carrying out these crimes. This is the actual real picture. It is a question of class. It is a question of the purposes of these institutions. And it is a question of who gets the promotion in these institutions. Who gets the promotion? Well, it's, as I said, the most loyal bagman. And that goes for all the police chiefs in Britain. It goes for all the politicians. It goes for the senior churchmen. Key example, a certain Mr. Justin Welby, now retired, former Archbishop of Canterbury, who, of course, was done for covering up the abuse of a senior member of the Church of England priesthood. Again, he would hardly be alone in that. There are many guilty of such things. And the reason why Welby got the job in the first place is because he was a good chap who'd probably done his fair share of cover-ups, and it was his turn for the big chair. And, of course, he's a private school boy and a former oil company executive, so why not give it to him? He sounds ideal for the Church of England, where, of course, believing in God is very much an optional extra. So now let us turn to how this is manipulated by the likes of Mr. Yaxley Lennon and, of course, Musk. But Yaxley Lennon and those aligned with him are the ones who have been pushing this the hardest. And the question of how to deal with this is, of course, one that we should look at, because the temptation for leftists is to say, "Oh, there's no problem here at all. This is all just racists talking shit." But again, that response would miss the point. Fact is that some of the people getting angry about this are doing so for quite genuine reasons. They're feeling that those who commit these crimes get away with it far too often. Well, that is true. Those who commit them are often protected by the system. Well, that is true. Those who run the system have no interest in pursuing justice. Well, that is true. Now, the issue is there isn't truth in here. The issue is that the rightists, the fascists, systematically mislead people and point their anger in the wrong direction. The issue isn't the presence of Muslims in Britain. The issue is what we've just been talking about here, which is the way in which these perverted individuals get away with their crimes, because they know how to select victims that the system won't take seriously. They don't go out there and do this to mostly anyway. I mean, it happens from time to time, but they're not going out there doing this to the children of the rich. They're doing it to the poorest of the poor most of the time. And these guys are repulsive, but they're not completely stupid. They know who to target and how they can, and if they target this particular group, that they can get away with doing so. I mean, again, this is based on class position. This is based on the fact that these guys are confident that their victims, if they're not manipulated beyond to the point where they won't make complaints, won't be taken seriously, even if they do. And here we should just mention in passing that, of course, the ranks of the police force, even with all the woke stylings that these ridiculous idiots engage in these days, the ranks of the police force in Britain, as in any country, is stuffed full of the most dull-witted, tripe-headed, maggot-brained reactionaries that you could possibly find. This is true now. It was true 50 years ago. It was true 50 years before that. In this sense, nothing has changed. They might go pirouetting around a pride flag in a pair of sparkly Nike shoes at Pride weekend, but that's just a small number of cops. Most of those are the careerist types who are using the woke stylings to get themselves a promotion. Most of the rank and file knuckle draggers who just enjoy cracking skulls are about as anti-woke as you could get. And those are the guys that will laugh out of the station some young girl who's making a complaint and which won't take her seriously. Again, there's a reason why Jimmy Savile mentioned in his autobiography in the early 1970s, where he bragged about how he could get away with abusing teenage runaways, because if he was arrested, he could take half the local police station down with him. This is in print. This is what he wrote in the early 1970s. True then, true now. This is the kind of police force you have, everybody. I hope you enjoy it. So, the elements of truth here are, of course, systematically distorted and racialized. And this is the way that reaction always operates. They take the justified fears and suspicions of the working class in particular, and twist them and racialize them and mislead people. Now, I would urge anybody who's taking the likes of Elon Musk particularly seriously just to, look at his own record. Look at the people he's associated with. This guy's as dirty as it gets. This guy's associated with as many celebrity pedophiles as you can possibly imagine. Diddy, Epstein, etc., and all of their friends. So he's not to be taken seriously. The issue should be taken seriously, though. And it should be taken seriously because if you don't, then you are leaving an open goal for right-wingers to manipulate. And of course, we shouldn't take the likes of Yaxley Lennon remotely seriously as well, because the likes of Mr. Yaxley Lennon have also been very closely associated with all manner of sex offenders all the way through his political career. 10 years ago, there was a leak that came out of the criminal records of the senior members of the EDL, and quite a number of them had been convicted of child sex offences. Why? Well, because these are the kind of people the intelligence services recruit in Britain and in America and in France, Germany. Any people who have done that kind of thing, people who have committed like the worst crimes that anybody could possibly ever be convicted of. I mean, there's murderers and some serial killers who are regarded better than the disgusting figure of the child rapist. But these are the kind of people who were in the hierarchy of the EDL, and there's a reason for that. As I say, it is because things like the EDL, and before them the BNP, are very heavily influenced by the British state. Just as I know we have a number of viewers in the United States, so same thing is happening over there. The leader of the Proud Boys, remember him, Enrico Terrio? Guy was an FBI informant for years. There'll be so many other cases, including, of course, the Oklahoma City bombing, of the ultra right wing ultimately being indistinguishable from certain law enforcement and intelligence agencies' operations. Same is true here. Same was true in, of course, Northern Ireland, the occupied 6 counties of Ireland, where, as I've said before, when we were talking about the Jeffrey Donaldson case, there were sting operations being run by the intelligence services in the occupied 6 counties of Ireland, which targeted children's homes, where they knew very well that members of the Orange Order and other loyalist paramilitaries were going there to abuse children. Got all this stuff on camera, presented it to these people later on, and said, right, here you go, Billy, old boy. Looks like we've got some pictures of you up to no good. Don't worry, son. These will remain under lock and key. Just, play the game. And this is standard intelligence service manipulation of the most, disgusting criminals that you could possibly find and bringing them on board as assets. Again, there's a reason why Whitney Webb's reporting where he's only ever seen on alternative media channels. And even then, when she dares criticize some of the right-wing favorites, suddenly they don't like her anymore either. Because these things are standard, as she points out in a lot of her reporting. This is standard operating procedure for the British and the Americans, has been for years. And this is, part of the reason why abusers gangs of abusers get away with it, because they're often connected to somebody who's involved with these kind of operations that are being done on behalf of an intelligence agency, a police agency, or some combination of the above. Now, I want to give another example of how, again, so it draws on the sex offender issue of how a legitimate complaint of the working class did get manipulated. The case 25 years ago now, all the way back in, I believe it was the year 2000, which is the News of the World anti-pedophile campaign. Now, for those of you who are my age or older, who are of perfidious Albion origin, you may remember this. And this was a campaign started by the now defunct Murdoch-owned tabloid News of the World, which was, again, a horrible rag. It got closed down in the end because its reporters had been hacking into dead children's mobile phones. Lovely stuff. But they spotted a potential sales boost that they could engage in by bringing up what is, again, a legitimate issue of working class anger, which is that the recently released pedophiles were being housed in areas which were working class areas where there were many children there, often who would be playing outside, particularly in the summer. And that these creeps were, of course, hanging around and getting up to their old tricks. Now, this is a legitimate cause for complaint, a very legitimate cause for complaint. And you'd have to be an idiot not to see that. And of course, the people running the News of the World back then weren't stupid. They know that this was an emotive subject, one that if they tapped into it could get them a lot of sales. And tap into it they did. Now, this led to a response from the British left, which can only be described as mostly disastrous and very revealing, which is that they just pointed at all these working class people who were staging legitimate protests about the fact that, some of the worst criminals in Britain were being dumped in their areas, putting their children at risk. The British left reacted by laughing at them. Oh, look at these horrendous peasant types complaining, and oh my God, look at them. They even attacked a pediatrician because they thought that he was listed in the phone book under his sexual predilections, which is a reported case that floated around where, like, there was a story about one guy who was listed in the phone book. Remember those? Under the term pediatrician, that somebody like bricked his house or something because they thought that meant pedo. Now, how true that is, I mean, I can't remember now, but it was something that was repeated endlessly by leftists at the time. Now, again, this left the issue wide open to right wingers because, again, you have here a legitimate cause of complaint. You have a working class or several working class communities with the quite legitimate knowledge, in actual fact, not feeling, but knowledge that the state just does not give a solitary shit about them. That's why it is dumping these dangerous offenders in their areas. And the left just left the whole issue open to ultra reactionaries and the Murdoch press because they wouldn't touch it. Now, one might ask why the left in Britain, most of it anyway, so routinely fails to take the issue of child safety or women's safety particularly seriously. Why is that? Interesting question. If we get into that, we could be here all night, but I will speculate a little bit for you. In fact, it's not speculation because I have some knowledge about which I will speak. And if you look at the number of scandals that have come out of particularly some of the largest Trotskyite organizations, again, I'm thinking here particularly of the Socialist Workers' Party, scandals involving a man named Martin Smith, rather euphemistically referred to as Comrade Delta, who was, shall we say, interested in a predatory fashion in forcing himself upon girls that were barely out of their teens or were still in their teens, one of the two. And it's pretty fucking obvious he was guilty of that. No action was ever taken against him. The state never took any action against him either. One might ask why. And there was another guy who was actually a high school teacher, also senior member of the SWP. This was just last year, who was done for pedo activities. And again, like high school teacher, senior member of the SWP. So when one of your most recent leaders is a high-profile sex offender, sue me, Martin, if you're watching, by the way, and you want to take this to court. You can have the entire £5 in my bank account if you're not guilty of this. Do please take up the challenge. And when another senior member of yours is a pedo, then you might think that there's something pretty fundamentally fucking wrong with the culture of such an organization, where such men could not only reach the top, but stay there for many, many years. So that might be part of the reason why the leftist leaders aren't interested in taking the complaints of the working class when it comes to these issues particularly seriously. Another is, of course, that the whole issue of child safety and women's safety is something that the left in Britain hasn't really known what to do with and has just ignored for years. They all virtue signal over it every now and again. So, for instance, a decade ago, there were like a series of protests on university campuses in Britain about women's safety. The SWP and the other Trotskyite organizations were all over them, giving their leaflets out. A few years later, of course, the Trotskyite organizations are all in favor of men who have suddenly declared themselves to be women being able to access women's private spaces just by declaring themselves to be another sex now. Now, of course, this points to the opportunism, the ultra-liberalism, and the generally degenerated nature of the SWP and most of the British left. But it points to, of course, the fact that they don't take these issues seriously at all, other than something to manipulate people over and try and gain a few recruits out of pretending to care about them. But fundamentally, these people, because they are so aligned, not with the working class, but as we have talked about many times before on this program, they are aligned with the values of the left of the bourgeoisie. They're not aligned with the working class at all. And so the values that they represent, the Trotskyites, the reformists, the various other denizens of the British left, the values they actually represent aren't derived out of them being rooted in the proletariat or being revolutionary organizations, because it's certainly not that. They are derived from the left wing of the bourgeois. And the left wing of the bourgeois, what are they in favor of? Decadence. They are in favor of a heavily pornographied society. They are in favor of the mass consumption of narcotics. They are in favor of the, in some cases, the erasure of the age of consent. Certain Mr. Peter Tatchell has been on the record on multiple occasions as being in favor of that. So when you look at this picture of what the British left actually is, which is that it derives most of its support and therefore most of the actual values upon which it stands from the degenerated left wing of the bourgeoisie. The right wing of the bourgeoisie is also equally degenerated. Of course, it represents a degenerate and failing and decaying system. They just pretend not to be. They're just better at lying about it. But because the left is hooked into the left of the bourgeoisie, this is why they represent the bizarre, freakish spectacle that they do. That, again, does not care about working class children, does not care about working class women, doesn't care about the working class at all. And it's the reason why they, of course, routinely spurn, laugh at, and mock the legitimate complaints that the working class brings up when it comes to the safety of their communities, the safety of their children, the fact that the authorities don't work for them. The working class know very well that they don't work for them. But because the bulk of the British left won't address the question as to, well, who do they actually work for? And why do the certain men get away with committing horrendous sex crimes? Because the left won't address that question, because it leads you also to the so-called values of the left end of the bourgeoisie, in which the British left is most certainly rooted, as is the American left. Then they don't address it, and they leave this whole field open to the likes of Mr. Yaxley Lennon, to the likes of Farage, and to the likes of Elon Musk. Now, I'm aware that Musk has been tweeting also about the failures of Mr. Farage, but we will come to that when we record our next episode of Decline and Fall with our comrade and friend Kit Clarenberg on Wednesday of this week. So please join me for that. But until then, I will bid you good day. I will urge you, if you haven't done so already, to like and share and subscribe, and also to thank those who support the program on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. Couldn't do the show without you, so thank you for all your support. I'll be back with another video for you tomorrow. Come back again also for the next episode of Decline and Fall on Wednesday of this week, and welcome to what will surely be a crazy ride through the year 2025. Now, I'll throw you back to your regular musical interval.
어떻게 정대로 지키는가를 새겨보라. 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다. 장군님 패승의 영도 따라서 선군의 붉은 기 그 신념으로 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다. 조체의 강성대국을 우리 어떻게 이 땅에 세우는가를 새겨보라. 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다. 장군님의 국의 뜻을 받들어 불굴의 정신력 그대 장으로 조선은 결심하면 한다. 조선은 한다면 한다. 조선 결심하면 한다. 조선 한다면